Substance dealers of Reddit, have you ever called CPS on a client? If so, what's the story? Story 1. So I'm only posting because I've been clean and sober for 3.5 years now, and anything I say I have already been convicted for, and I've officially finished all of my legal issues. I have never officially called Child and Family Services, but I had this one mother who used to constantly call me for drugs. And I had never been to her house before. I was a bit of a sketchbag and didn't trust anybody. But after a few months, I built a relationship with her where I felt at ease going to her house. When I went to go drop some off, it was child tax day. I never knew she was a mother. Normally not an issue for me, I could not care less. I walked into the house and the smell was unbelievable. Cigarettes, sweat, crap, and urine. There was broken glass on the floor, 12-inch burn circles on the floor, crap on the floors. The TV was smashed, the bathroom door was literally torn off and in the hallway. I had seen a little toddler that was walking around with no diaper on and he had his own crap all over him. He was so malnourished, he was gray. The mother came to give me her money, and I took the bag of drugs I had, put it in my pocket, and I told her to buy some diapers for her kid. I told her that she would have to find her dope somewhere else, and walked away. A good friend of mine who had always tried to help me out was a social worker, and I told her who she was and where she lived and gave her some final details so she could make a final decision. I will always remember that kid. The last I heard, he had been taken away and the mother was in jail. I wish him the best of luck in this cruel world. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. When I was selling to her, a lady shook her crying baby in front of me. I wigged out, took the baby, dumped $500 worth of substances, and called 911 for my car. She didn't put up a fight until the cops came to arrest her. She tried to sue me for kidnapping. Definitely not the best strategy for me. I was 18 and addicted pretty bad, but when the baby saw a doctor under state care, he was covered in bruises, a couple of burns, and had 2 broken ribs already. I'm convinced she would have unalived him. He's 10 now and happy and thriving. The whole experience and legal battle when she tried to have me charged with kidnapping is how I got sober. Little did that lady know that she actually saved OP in a way. What a weird way things shake out sometimes. Story 3. Ah yes, back when I was younger, maybe 17, I got my first job at Domino's Pizza. One of my managers was a really scummy 24-year-old guy that looked like a troll, had astoundingly bad hygiene, and also a crappy attitude, but sold good weed and bought me cigarettes. This was my first experience having older friends able to get me good stuff on demand like that. One day he hooked me up with a friend of his that was selling shrooms, so I met with that guy and bought an ounce, and then walked to my manager's house to sell him some and also get some weed. So turns out him and his similarly aged sister, who has a 1-year-old baby, both live in makeshift bedsheet bedrooms in the basement of the tiny house. They smoked inside, windows closed. Cats everywhere, bugs everywhere, weird, gross, sour smells coming from all areas. Everything gross. Their mom was home, but she was senile and addicted to painkillers, as well as the sister. So we did the trade downstairs, and when I go back upstairs, I go to the kitchen to throw some stuff away, and I see the baby in a high chair, eating a pack of cigarettes. He's just sitting there, tearing them open and putting them in his mouth and spitting it out. I ran downstairs and told the sister, and she just started yelling, "Mom, Mom, get the baby!" a couple times lazily, then gives up and goes back to just sitting there. It was surreal. I hadn't ever experienced such neglect and disgust from people. I left and waited 2 days to call CPS because I didn't want my manager to know it was me who called. I know the kids got taken away and she went to live with a different family member, or at least that's what I was told. Story 4. I pulled up to this woman's house. I was 19 at the time. She was a regular and often asked if I had any harder stuff. I was strictly a weed dealer. When I walked into her house, she had 2 babies. Twins. Female dealer here, by the way. When I asked to use the bathroom, she said she didn't have running water due to money issues. There was a 5-gallon bucket in the bathroom to pee and crap in. This bucket was extremely full, not to mention the overflowing trash cans and tied-off trash bags in the living room. I couldn't believe how gross her house was. I panicked. I called CPS and told them I was a family friend. I drove my car down the road a little and waited for the cops to show up. I watched them pull the woman out of the house in cuffs. She turned out to have hard drugs in her house. I still wonder about those twins today. Story 5. I used to sell weed, X, and K around 20 years back, and I had a regular that would come to see me like clockwork every weekend. He seemed like an okay guy, excluding the drugs, of course, but I can't really criticize here because I was the dealer. And after a while, his pickups turned into 5-minute chats and then 30-minute stays. During a convo, he let slip that he had a son, a toddler, and that he looked after him every weekend, and that when he was at my joint picking up his kid, he was in the car and the kid was in the back seat. He had a Hiace minivan windowless. And not only that, but because he didn't want to share his single bed with his kid and risk getting it urinated in, he made the kid sleep in the van outside. But it's okay because it was locked and parked in the backyard, so the kid was safe. As soon as he let it slip, he was done as a customer. I told him to get the frick out and never come back on the threat of a severe beating. He threatened to rat me to the cops. I told him that my suppliers saw me as a decent source of income and wouldn't take it very well. He left. It rocked me so hard I felt almost concussed. I honestly couldn't process how sterile and casual he was about it all, and I knew I had to tell CPS. So I called anonymously and said I lived on a street and could hear the kid crying from the van at night every weekend, and that I had seen him incoherent and smelling of weed during the day. I never saw him again, and I don't know what happened to either him or his son, but it has stuck with me all this time and I feel responsible for his actions in part, because he did these things in pursuit of his drugs. I eventually stopped dealing and got my crap together, and the way I felt about this and the realization that my actions affected people far further from me than I thought was a huge part of it. Nothing changes the fact that I contributed to that kid's neglect and abuse though. Willingly or not, it makes no difference, and it's one of the ugly, crappy things that I've done that I have to live with. OP seems pretty hard on himself. Like, don't get me wrong, yeah, what he did was pretty bad and he enabled this guy at the very least. But he seems to have started to get his act together, and that's like the best thing you can do. You can't change the past, so you just have to change yourself for the future. So OP, if you're listening to this in any way, just know that I think you're doing alright. Story 6. Not sure if this counts, but in the late 1990s, I used to sell reefer part-time while I was in college. One of my regular customers turned his sister on to me. She called for a delivery. No big deal. I went there one time. She had 3 little kids, like a couple toddlers and an infant. Her house was full of roaches. I was disgusted. I called CPS, not because of the drugs and the babies, but because of how frickin' filthy that house was. It caused a lot of problems for her and her boyfriend. They were in the system for a long time. Not sure how it all turned out, but screw that woman. Story 7. Real short and simple. Yes. A friend of my girlfriend introduced us to her neighbors, who were like 50 to 60-year-old hippies that looked like a bad acid trip but bought weed regularly for full price. Couple months down the road, they start being more friendly with my girlfriend and I and start talking more when we'd go drop off the crap. The topic began with her telling us how she has custody of her daughter's oldest born because her daughter was sitting time at a women's prison. Backstory on the kid: looks 15 but clearly has the mind capacity of a 6 or 7-year-old. Not sure what was wrong with her specifically, but you could tell that there were issues. Near the end of the conversation about her daughter, she brought up the fact that her granddaughter was prescribed Adderall 30XR, and whenever they got her prescription, they'd dump all the little beads into a bowl to use whenever they couldn't find whatever they needed, and instead filled the Adderall with Benadryl to make the kid sleep. Till this day, I'll never forget the emotions I felt after getting out of there and sitting in my car. My hands were shaking so bad it was hard to Google information about CPS, much less type any in. I felt goosebumps in every pore of my scalp. As a father of 2, I never knew such evil existed. Obviously in movies and crap, but never experienced something like that firsthand. Story 8. I used to deal way back when I was a hot mess in an extremely abusive relationship. I called CPS on not only one person, but 6. The one that sticks with me the most though, not because of the severity, but because I called twice, was this couple who used to pick up from me at a laundromat, and we ended up seeing each other often enough I felt okay to go to their place. I was floored when I stepped through that door. I kid you not. They had taken up all the carpeting in the house and had torn down the walls to get at the copper wiring and pipes. They had no electricity or running water. There was nothing in that house except for some sleeping bags in what used to be the living room. And then I noticed a nest of blankets with bright blue eyes peering at me over the pile, and realized there was a toddler and a small child no more than 5. Until this point, I had never seen nor heard them talk about having kids. The poor kids were filthy and obviously malnourished. The house stunk of drugs so badly I gagged. I couldn't believe it. I guess the look of shock was super apparent on my face because the dad said that they were squatting and introduced me to their kids. I made some small talk and then left. The phone was ringing for CPS before I closed my car door. I gave them the address and let them know the conditions of the home, and they were squatting with 2 small children. Gave the names of the parents as I knew them and the names of the kids. They ended up going to jail for squatting, and the kids went to live with a relative. They ended up contacting me back to sell to them after they were bailed out of jail, and I just never responded. However, the guy I was with at the time ended up selling to them, and they were living in a field in a tent with the kids. I got into a huge fight with my boyfriend over it and was so disgusted he still sold to them. I ended up calling CPS on them again. From what I heard from other people that knew them, the kids were taken permanently after that, and about a year later the mom ended up going to prison for attempted murder, and the dad went to prison for check fraud some weeks after that. These people have a lot of trust in their dealers to just tell them all this stuff. It's either that or they don't realize what's happening is wrong. I guess either one is possible when they're obviously using. I just really hope these kids have had a better chance at life since then. Story 9. This was a long time ago and I've since gotten clean and started my own family. But there was a girl I knew who was homeless with her newborn son. On Easter weekend, I was walking on this trail to go meet with some people to sell them a sack. It started raining and that, of course, made me mad. There's these bridges that cross over the top of the trail and a lot of kids gather and smoke or get spun under the bridges. And that's where I found her. She was passed out drunk with some random guy under the bridge while her newborn baby sat strapped in his car seat in the rain. He wasn't under the bridge. He was crying and he looked dirty. I didn't have any kids at this point, but I panicked seeing the little guy. I grabbed him, dropped all the crap I was supposed to be selling, and walked off the trail and up the couple of blocks to the police station. I told them what happened and where I'd found him. CPS took him, and he ended up getting adopted. Story 10. This is a sad story, but I'll tell it anyway because it was the past. There have been so many stories, but this one takes the cake. It's the reason I stopped selling and turned my life around. I must have been around 16 or 17 at the time. I was in high school and also had a part-time job at Dairy Queen. And on top of school and a regular job, I was selling hard drugs. I was also selling weed and cigarettes at school. This story involves a hard drug user. At the time of the incident, I've already been selling hard for about 1 or 2 years. Profit was pretty good. I'd say around $300 per day on average, which was great for my age. But I spent it as fast as it came. I was young and I was dumb. So as a dealer selling hard drugs, I would use some addict's house to sell out of. I guess the cops would call these things crack shacks or projects. I'd be supplying the addict a cheaper price of product so that I could use their house to sell out of. They would also refer a lot of other people to buy from me, and or they would help sell for me in return for product. So the incident is in this addict's house. He, about 50-year-old man, has a girlfriend/partner or something like that. The girlfriend had a little boy, maybe the age of 3, 4, or 5. I didn't ask either, because I was ashamed of myself for not preventing his mother from using. This kid, though, I felt like he was my little brother in some way. I would cook for him when he was hungry, and his mom was always too messed up to do anything. One day, I go to work at the shack. It was a regular day. I get into the house, get my products ready, weigh out the stuff, and bag them up. Knock on the bedroom door of the guy, homeowner. I see him sleeping. His girlfriend is also on the couch sleeping because she is always high and messed up. The kid is just sitting there watching TV. I make him some macaroni and cheese. Now I gotta wake up the guy because I need an update on what products he's moved the day before. So I go in his room. I see that his eyes were still open. White foam all over him like he's overdosed. It's normal for me to see overdoses, but this was beyond an overdose. He's been OD'd for too long, which means he's dead. He was probably overdosed for at least 10 hours because I could smell it and he was cold to the touch. His vomit was dried and his eyes were dried as well. Now I'm in one of the biggest panics I've ever been in, and as I'm trying to figure out what to do, I sit down with the kid and stay there until he finishes his mac and cheese. And I'm just thinking about what I'm gonna do next. His mom, sleeping behind me on the couch, is still alive but has no idea what had happened, or maybe she does, I don't know. I left the shack, drove about 2 blocks away, used the prepaid cell phone I have to call the police and report it. Sat in my car until the police showed up. From that day on, I am anti-hard drugs. I still wonder about the kid. He's probably 16 now without a mom. Every time I see the mac and cheese at the supermarket, I get this screwed up feeling in my gut. And for the guy that died, I know I didn't unalive him, I've accepted that, but could he have lived longer if I was never in his life? His life story was pretty amazing. He did cool things when he was young. He got into substances when his mom passed away. He didn't have a dad, though. One tip for anyone reading this: never judge a person on where they are in life, even if they are crackheads, as many people would say. Some people go through the most brutal situations and have no love and support to get back on their feet. I'm glad I was able to be the man's friend before he died, and I know I treated the kid as a big brother/father, and I hope he remembers that part. This really seems like a case of OP just kind of also being a kid himself when doing this and not realizing the consequences of his actions. And yeah, he learned. I'm proud of him for learning though, and actually taking it as a learning experience. Story 11. I did many years ago. When I pushed, I did not deal in hard drugs, only THC, MDMA, psychedelics. Anyway, I was at this woman's house because she was not only a client but also a girlfriend of one of my best friends, so I was there often enough to see him. I consistently found myself and anyone else at the house left alone with the child. It seemed if anyone showed up, she would sneak out. Come to find out she was doing hard drugs with the upstairs neighbors, and who the hell knows what else. I hate to know who that child was left alone with. She had been an on-again, off-again addict. Hard drugs, pills, etc. Many times I witnessed that she would watch her toddler put cigarettes in her mouth from the ground, which I would take away from the baby, and she would laugh and say, "It's not that big of a deal." I rode in her car a few times. I was a smoker at that time as well as her. I would get out of the car to light up, and she would tell me that I could smoke in the car, but I refused because of the child in the back seat. When I was around, I would try my best to kind of steer her away from the child when she wanted to have a cigarette. It is something very specific that began to steer me clear of any tobacco use. She had a bug problem in her house, and she would spray bug killer on every single one of her daughter's toys to keep the bugs off them. I explained to her that her baby chews on her toys and bug killer can be seriously harmful, and she again tells me that it's not a big deal. She has seen her baby put worse things in her mouth and that it will toughen her up. I had enough. I'm the oldest of 9 kids, and I nannied for several families for over a decade aside from mothering my own siblings. I know that a child can handle a lot, but there are so many things that she was doing that kept ringing off the danger bells in my head. I knew that if the child ever got sick or even died because of her carelessness, I would feel directly responsible for not doing anything about it. If you see something, say something, especially when it involves a child. My goal was not to have her child taken from her, and she never did, but just for someone with authority to keep tabs on the child. I could not stand to be around her anymore, and it was well within my nature to take on a caretaker role. But that relationship I had with those people was seriously damaging my mental state. I had nothing but fear and sorrow for that little girl. I lost a best friend by doing this, but the kid was worth more than a friend who could not see what his woman was doing right in front of him. Where they are now is even more sad, but I can't bring myself to dive into that. Story 12. Former dealer here. It's been many years now, but I sold hard drugs and pills. I once had a lady come in the trap house with a newborn. She was literally selling herself and/or her baby for a few rocks. When I saw the newborn in crappy diapers and dirty as crap, I knew I had to give her a few rocks. I let her smoke and leave. I also called BCW, Bureau of Children's Welfare, on her as soon as she walked out. She lived on my street. I couldn't let her try to sell her baby. I couldn't let her keep it either. I just couldn't call the police. The baby was in a foster home less than a week later. The lady disappeared shortly after. I never saw her again. I hope she never got the baby back. She was a real piece of crap.